My wife did hours. And she made really good time to write. It's a
I mean, it's completely.
Yeah. Jennifer, we ready? We're ready. All right. Let's see. Let's make sure I have the date right. All right. I will call to order the October 15th meeting of the Salem Planning Commission. Let me do that again. I will call to order the October 15th, 2024 Salem Planning Commission meeting. Bang. Okay. Jennifer, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Pott? Here. Commissioner Freda? Here. Commissioner Heller?
Here.
Commissioner Laura Bicken?
Here.
Commissioner Rhodes is absent. Commissioner Slayer?
Here.
Commissioner Ted is absent. Commissioner Truitt?
Here.
Commissioner Mirabello?
Here.
We have one.
All right, thank you. Before we go on to the consent calendar, is there anyone here who has some comments they'd like to make? Seeing none, I will look to Commissioner Fox to see if we have a motion on the minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes from the September 17th planning commission.
All right, thank you. Is there a second? I will second. All right, seconded by Commissioner Truitt. Jennifer, again, if you could call the vote, please.
Commissioner Pott?
Aye.
Commissioner Freda?
Aye.
Commissioner Heller?
Abstain.
Commissioner Laura Bicken? Aye. Commissioner Slayer?
Aye.
Commissioner Truitt?
Aye.
Commissioner Mirabello?
Aye. All right, motion passes. All right, moving on, we have no public hearings, but we do have a special order of business. So to that, I will look to our planning administrator to lead us through the conversation.
Absolutely. I think you all have a copy in front of you, and it was in the packet. We proposed a few changes in the planning commission rules or the bylaws. The first one is the bottom of page 1. It currently says that our meeting will be held in council chambers, but if for some reason it's unavailable, it'll be held at Salem Civic Center. If you don't know, there's a bond project. The Civic Center is being seismically upgraded, and we're still not sure where we're moving, where our meeting will be. But we do know we're moving out of this building, I believe, in April. So we're still trying to figure it out. We'll probably be at the library, which is part of Salem Civic Center, but we just thought we should change it to say preference will be given to Salem Civic Center in case it ends up we actually need to be somewhere else for 2 years. So that, and then it did say designated by the president, and I feel like I've never asked any Salem Planning Commission president if they were okay with designating the Anderson room, because when we're not in here, it's because someone more important than us has kicked us out. And we, we have to coordinate and see if we can get Anderson or Laux or conference room, and it's really just dictated by what rooms are available and what technology is available. So, yeah, sorry. The other change is at the top of page 3 under forum, which I believe we talked about before. Currently says 5. Was kind of a problem when we didn't have a full commission, so we just proposed to change it to say a majority of the appointed members. Hopefully won't be an issue anytime in the near future since we have a full commission, but you never know. And then the other change is very top of page 5, which is under the section of time limits for speakers in public hearings. We had appeal recently, and we don't actually have in our rules how much time the appellant gets. So looking at council rules, they have a time limit, and so we wanted to add in that the appellant, assuming it's not the applicant, would get 10 minutes. If the applicant is the appellant, they already get 15. They don't get double time just because they're in the decision. But we thought that should be stated in the rules, so there's no confusion. So I think we just kind of made it up for the last hearing. And those are the changes we are proposing.
All right, thank you. Are there questions? Controversies? All right. Would someone like to move the recommended amendments to the minutes?
I would move that we accept the recommended changes to the bylaws as outlined in resolution 2402. All right, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Vice President Heller. Thank you. Is there any more discussion on this? No, surprising. All right. Hearing none, Jennifer, if you could call the roll, please.
Commissioner Hot.
Aye.
Commissioner Fryback.
Aye.
Commissioner Heller.
Aye.
Commissioner Warren Lincoln.
Aye.
Commissioner Slater.
Aye.
Commissioner Truitt.
Aye.
Commissioner Burbidge.
Aye. All right, motion passes. Speeding right along here. We are now at informational reports. And I believe we have two guests here. We're well known to all of us, so take it away, please.
Good evening, I'm Julie Hanson, the Transportation Planning Manager with the Public Works Department, and we have.
Eunice Campbell, Region Planning Manager and Community Planning and Development Department.
So we have a presentation tonight to give an update on where we are with Salem in Motion, which is the update to the transportation system plan. I will get into that in a second with the presentation. So I figured out how to share. Okay. So to start with, we're gonna be talking about what is Salem in Motion and why we are doing it. You'll see that we have it divided largely into three different categories. These are also reflected on our project webpage. So transportation phase 1, which is the regional scenario planning, transportation phase 2, which is the more traditional update to the Salem transportation system plan. And then we have a land use element, which relates to the walkable mixed use areas and code updates. We'll talk more about each of those as we go along. So Salem in Motion, it's a multi-year project, and it will be updating the city's transportation system plan, both to advance our local goals and priorities, but also to implement the state's new climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, which were adopted in 2022, about the same time, almost exactly that we were adopting the Salem update to the comprehensive plan. The state's rules focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, increasing housing choices, and a focus on more equitable outcomes for Oregonians. We knew about these rules, as we were working on our Salem, and so during that process, both Eunice and I were involved in the state rulemaking, and so we tried to bring that over into the conversations about our Salem and our policies and plans to ensure consistency alignment. So there is a lot of alignment between them, as well as the city's climate action plan, which was being developed at the same time. It's bothering me up here, so I'm going to say okay. So this regional scenario planning is the first part of our transportation work. We are working on this right now with ODOT and our regional partners. So this involves Salem, Kaiser, and Marion County, and Oregon Department of Transportation and the Department of Land Conservation and Development. We're working to improve transportation options for everybody in the region, and make sure that everybody has a choice in how they get around. So as I mentioned, this relates to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and has specific targets for the Salem-Kaiser region that were set by the legislature. These are the targets that were set for Salem-Kaiser area. And these are measured against the 2005 per capita vehicle miles traveled. And as you can see, by 2050, there's a requirement that we reduce vehicle miles traveled by 30% from that 2005 amount. And I will say this is different from the city's goal to be carbon neutral, which was part of the climate action plan. I won't get too hung up on that because really all of these things are moving in the same direction and are supported. So for the regional scenario plan, scenario planning, we're looking at different scenarios and we're looking at what different transportation and land use changes can we make and can we, the city, influence that will reduce emissions from vehicles, will reduce those vehicle miles traveled. Some of the examples of things that we're looking at would be increasing transit ridership, looking at active transportation, how can we increase that, support it. Pricing, are there pricing tools in our toolbox that would help? Incentives for electric vehicles. Remote work options, when those reductions were first adopted, we hadn't gone through COVID, and so we see that there is definitely a big opportunity there. And then finally, land use. Does anybody know why it says click to join audio?
I think it wants you to
Oops,
maybe try clicking.
No, you don't have to.
okay. I just wanted it to go away because it was blocking the bottom of the slide. Okay, and land use, so. Okay. So in the spring, as part of this process, we did some public outreach. We had a survey that went out to all of our mailing list. It was also shared through Marion County and Kaiser and other forums. We had a open house May 29th, and we were asking people, what should we be doing to meet the climate goals and reduce emissions? The survey, we got quite a few responses. Obviously, 270 is not anywhere near the population of our area, but for an online survey that was voluntary, it was decent. What we heard through the survey wasn't really surprising based on what we've heard through the Salem process, and that was that there's a lot of support for active transportation. Giving people choices in how they get around and supporting more mixed use development to create the dynamics that support active transportation. There was less support for electric vehicle infrastructure and also for limiting or charging for parking. There was concerns expressed about the impacts that that might have on small businesses in particular. So that was in the spring, summer, and now we, the consultant team, which is under contract with ODOT, is looking at different scenarios to see how they perform in relation to that greenhouse gas reduction goal. So one scenario is current trends. They sometimes refer to it as the reference scenario. And then they have another scenario that basically takes some state assumptions. The state assumes some state-led actions, but they also assume that locals are gonna do certain actions, and so, but it's really their assumptions. And then the point we're at right now is going to be working with our advisory committee to come up with some alternative scenarios that align with local and regional priorities, including what we've heard from the public in the spring and summer. The advisory committee will be then selecting a potential preferred scenario. The advisory committee itself is made up of representatives from Salem, Kaiser, Marion County, and the Transit District. So there are 3 City of Salem representatives, currently the mayor and 2 councilors. Kaiser, there are You know, Marion County has 2 representatives, and Kaiser has two representatives, and Transit District has 1 representative. So far, they've actually only met once. Their next meeting is not currently on the books, but is anticipated for early to mid-December. And that will be a pretty key meeting where they will be getting to look at these different scenario results and give direction on whether or not we want to, how many more scenarios we want to investigate. So once we get advisory committee recommendation on that potential preferred scenario, it will be going out to public involvement again to get input on what's being proposed and on how we might measure our progress towards meeting those goals. Now, this timeline is somewhat subject to how many scenarios the advisory committee wants the project team to look at. So if they say, hey, you know, this isn't anywhere close to aligning with our priorities, then we might need a little bit more time for that technical work and more meetings. So it's somewhere between, you know, winter and mid-2025. The preferred regional scenario will have to meet those greenhouse gas reduction targets. The advisory committee with all the jurisdictions will be making a recommendation of what's preferred, but then it will be up to each of the 3 jurisdictions, Salem, Kaiser, Marion County, Transit's not required to do this, to submit the scenario to the state for approval to comply with the state's rules. So in the ideal world, all 3 jurisdictions will be submitting the same thing and, you know, we'll all be happy. The plan also will include performance measures and targets. So this will be showing how we see meeting these targets and how, you know, where we think we'll be along the way. Then over time, we're going to be required to report on those targets. Pretty much every 4 years currently is tied to the update of the regional transportation plan, so that might change, but basically every 4 or 5 years, we'll have to be making reports to the state. And if we're not meeting the targets that we've set, then we'll have to propose corrective actions. And so once it's approved by the state, then we need to incorporate it into our local plans. So that will include changes to our transportation system plan, possibly changes to our comprehensive plan. It really depends on what that actual scenario is. So that's why this is phase 1 instead of, you know, I know a lot of people, a lot of our constituents, a lot of our leaders want us to move right into phase 2 and get into the, you know, the nitty-gritty of the transportation system plan, but because of this regulatory structure, we really have to wait till we have the goalposts set by the state. Oops. So it's not to say we aren't working on phase 2, we are starting on transportation phase 2, updating the transportation system plan. Currently, we are working with the state to develop a multimodal inventory that will support those rules. So it's working between our asset management, our GIS staff, and ODOT's consultant team to look to see what data we have that supports these requirements, where we have gaps, and how it can be formatted to most efficiently meet the rule requirements. We are also working to prepare a historic equity context statement. So the rules, I mentioned that they had a focus on equitable outcomes. They also require that when we do a major update to our transportation system plan, which this will be, that we need to have a very clear understanding of the basically the history of how transportation and land use decisions have impacted traditionally underserved populations in Salem, going back quite a ways. And while we have, you know, some history, we don't have anything that really is focused on this. And so we have chosen at the city level to contract with a historic research firm to develop that context statement to sort of form a basis for our work on the transportation system plan. And then the third thing that we're doing is we're working with the Oregon Department of Transportation to solicit proposals for a consultant team. So ODOT is offering, paying for some of the cost of updating our transportation system plan. But when they do that, that means we have to go through their process, and their process is a little bit slow. So right now, I think Eunice and I commented on the statement, what do they call it, statement of services. On August 8th, we sent that in, and we're still waiting on feedback from the procurement office at ODOT. So we anticipate that it will be released by the end of November, maybe earlier, hopefully earlier, with the goal to have a consultant on board. The original goal was January, but I've moved that to winter spring based on where we are today. We anticipate a 2 to 3 year planning process. The last year really being mostly the adoption process, which can take anywhere from 6 to 9 months. This phase 1 and phase 2 are closely connected with each other. I know that ODOT's a little hesitant about moving into phase 2 until we have phase 1 in place. In my world, the phase 2, we have enough of the legwork that will need to happen that even if phase 1 isn't quite done, we'll be able to make use of that time efficiently. So in the plan, like I mentioned, this is intended to implement the CFEC, climate friendly equitable community rules, performance targets, measures, the equity analysis. One thing that's different from previously is that the new rules require us to have a financially constrained project list. That is not something that the city of Salem has ever done in our own plan. We've had to do that on the regional plan, but it's a little different when you're talking at the city level. And by financially constrained, I don't mean we have to have the money in the bank. It's more that we have to develop a reasonable forecast of what resources we think we might have available between now and say 2050. And so it's, and we have to develop then the assumptions of the costs of the project so that we can align those two together. Walkable mixed use areas, we have to do extra planning in those areas, and then if we have any projects that would increase capacity through like general purpose lanes, and the best example in my mind is Kubler, Cordon, out near Mill Creek Corporate Center. So if we want to add additional travel lanes to support the employment and industrial development out there, that's going to require additional analysis. A lot of our local priorities align with the rules, but there are some differences. Definitely an emphasis on improving our bicycle pedestrian network. Safety is a big deal. We're going to be working on a Vision Zero plan, and so we want to meld those together. Supporting land uses, so not just mixed use and higher density development, but also our employment centers. Those are all integral to our health of our community. And then advancing the goals of our climate action plan. So throughout the process, we will be involving the community. Those are sort of a summary of the key goals for community engagement, pretty typical. There'll be a variety of engagement tools and activities. We do not have them specifically lined out yet. I will say that ODOT is not going to be paying for the community engagement part of it. That's going to be on city staff, and then if any additional resources are needed, that would be city funding. So we're still working through exactly how that's going to look and what the structure is going to be. We'll want to develop that with our consultant to lead, and because it doesn't make sense for us to say, hey, we're going to go out to the public in April if they don't have anything ready for us to share. There will be opportunities for planning commission engagement throughout the process. We'll definitely keep the planning commission informed I'm not yet sure if we will have an advisory committee. In the past, on some projects we have. So we have precedent, I guess, in the past of having maybe a representative of the planning commission who's puts in that extra time on the advisory committee. But I'm not sure yet if we're doing that. We also may be doing focus groups and a combination of events. But definitely, the planning commission is part of the adoption process. This is an amendment to our comprehensive plan. And so that will be coming through planning commission, so it's in everybody's interest to make sure the planning commission is engaged and informed so that we don't have any surprises when we get to the adoption process. And I'm gonna turn it over to Eunice.
Hello, Greg. So, the Salem in Motion, project focuses largely on transportation, but it is incorporating the climate friendly equitable rules that have to do with land use. So I just wanted to get kind of a brief overview of like the major components of land use that are part of this project. One of them is the walkable mixed use areas, which you may have heard of. The state refers to them as climate friendly areas. So last year, we did a study with the Council of Governments to look at what areas, should be, could be, what the state considers climate friendly areas. We essentially, because we were just coming off the Our Salem project where we asked people where you want to see walkable mixed use, we just built off the work we already did, the rezoning, the code update, the comprehensive plan update. And so these are the three areas that were studied by the Council of Governments, the downtown, north downtown area, and inner West Salem. These are all areas, again, that have already been zoned to accommodate essentially higher density, mixed use, jobs, housing, and also places where we want to emphasize where there's going to be good transit, good bike, good ped, ways for people to get around essentially without having to drive. So we finished that study last year and submitted it to the state, but there does need to be a designation process, which I'll talk about in a second. These three areas, there are rules from the state that say these areas need to accommodate or be able to accommodate or have the capacity to essentially include 30% of our housing today and going into the future. It's kind of a theoretical assumption that none of this has been developed and we can build to the full potential. So, high density, mixed use, not necessarily what's there today. So these areas have that capacity. So one of the reasons they're also chosen. They did have some rules in the state that we didn't quite meet. So we brought a code amendment through last month or the month before that increased the minimum density in downtown to meet these rules. So the density went up from 20 to 25 units per acre, and then established a minimum density in inner West Salem, the West Salem CV zone, so where Ross is as an example. And that established a minimum density of 15 units per acre. That was so eventually this will all align with the rules. There is requirements around mix of uses, but all of these areas already. So we do have to go through a formal designation process to say, as a city, these are officially our walkable mixed use areas. And that includes, again, some minor tweaks to the code. But there are specific transportation improvements or studies that need to occur that will happen during the transportation system plan update process related to these areas. That includes a look at what is the multimodal kind of network today and what are the gaps. So where are the missing sidewalks, bicycle infrastructure, et cetera, and what are potential projects to fill those gaps. So it's in these three specific areas, we'll be doing kind of a deeper dive in that multimodal analysis. And that's because these are meant to be, again, right, walkable mixed use areas. The second is a highway impact analysis or summary. So essentially, there's a lot of state highways going through this area. So the state's actually going to take that piece of work on. ODOT is going to be doing those highway impact summaries for us. We will weigh in, but they're going to be looking at kind of what is the impact of these walkable mixed use areas on those highways. And then we do have to designate these officially before we can adopt the TSP. The TSP itself has work that needs to be done in these friendly areas. Okay.
I was just gonna say that the TSP, one of the requirements as we prioritize projects is that we prioritize them in these walkable mixed use areas. So you have to sort of know where they are to do that.
So another project that we're just kicking off nowish is another code update. So climate friendly equitable rules have a whole host of requirements related to land use and land use regulations that are outside the walkable mixed use areas that essentially get at more compact, pedestrian friendly mixed use areas across the city. So how do you slow down traffic in neighborhoods? How do you make our commercial and industrial areas more walkable? So these are areas right now that, for example, don't have design standards. So this is gonna look at, do we need design standards even in those commercial areas? Are there tweaks to our existing design standards that are mixed use areas that maybe don't meet the code? So there's a whole host of changes that are gonna be coming. We are, the state is paying for a consultant team, DLCD is paying for a consultant team to help us with this work. We're gonna kick it off later this month. So they're gonna do an audit essentially of our code against the state rules and against kind of best practices in their guidebook that they're developing. And then recommend like, here's some changes you can make. There will be some stakeholder focus groups as part of that, so we'll wrap you all into that as you're interested. Because we want to kind of understand like if there are options for making an area more walkable or more compact, et cetera, like where do people want to go? Like if there's some options. So we'll be talking to the development community and others that are interested. Eventually we will be bringing this through the adoption process, probably at the same time as when we do adoption for the walkable mixed use areas. So it'll probably be one big package, again, prior to the TSB. So that's just a new project, exciting-ish. Oh, and this is just our website. So we were putting everything that we can on this website, the land use, transportation, scenario planning, and links to the regional scenario planning, which the state is hosting. So, yep, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a lot of material. I'm still processing what you said 10 minutes ago. Let's take questions then. I'm sure we will have some. Round your hand. Commissioner Frybeck.
I really like the presentation. I like it a lot. I just have two questions. The first one was, I've never heard of regional scenario planning outside of state of Oregon. Are there any other communities in different states that have done this kind of process? And is there any results of this that I could look at?
Outside of the state, I believe the consultants shared with us some other areas. I'm not super familiar with them though. I mean, the lead consultant team on the actual running of the scenarios is RSG. Right. So it's a consultant team led by Parametrics, but RSG does the actual, it's called Vision Eval, is the modeling tool or the scenario planning tool. So yeah, sorry, I don't have specifics there.
And Lane County has done regional scenario planning. They haven't actually adopted it and they haven't done, there's largely transportation. Oh, they haven't done the performance measures. So they have a head start that they're kind of finishing their work now. So if you want to look at the Lane County example, that's probably the most relevant.
I said Lane.
Eugene.
Eugene.
And and I think this is somewhat similar to what was done by Metro up in the Portland area, that one was smart.
Did you have a second question, Commissioner Frybeck?
Yeah, then the second question, you mentioned relative to the 2005 VMT, it's 30% reduction by 2050. Where are we at today compared to 2005?
Not sure. They have given us some they've given us data on like the current trend scenario. So like current trends doesn't get us to the 30% in 2050. I think it gets us somewhere around 10 or 11% reduction, but not all the way to the 30%. But I'm sure they've given it to us, I just don't.
That's okay. It's
Looks like Eunice is making a note to get us that information. Yes, thank you. Other questions? Why? I have a bunch. So, it seems to me over the past couple of years, and I've only been involved in this issue for 4 or 5 years, but it seems like there's been a significant shift with the state taking not only just a strong lead in requiring things from us, but also setting mandates, targets, and penalties. Where that did not used to be, as I understand it, the case. Is that correct characterization?
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that so those reduction targets, that 30%, that was set quite a number of years ago. However, it was set as a voluntary target for Salem Kaiser area, also for Eugene Springfield, although at the time they were required to do the scenario planning, but not to actually meet the target. So yes, it was a change. And it was largely in response, I believe, to the governor's executive order related to climate.
Thank you. I'm not necessarily objecting. I'm just trying to understand the context here. It seems like that if we have a state mandate and our infrastructure currently is not meeting is not contributing to meeting the goals that we need to meet, that is going to have a profound impact on how we select capital improvement plans going down the road. And there'll be less political discretion and it'll be more trying to meet the objectives of the state mandates. Is that a reasonable inference there?
I think that the capital investment decisions will be tied to how we're performing on our measures, and that will tie to the transportation system plan relating to what projects are actually in there. But there's still lots of different buckets of money that don't necessarily, you can't necessarily use funds for this to do that, even if you're not meeting your benchmark.
One question I had is that our climate friendly equitable neighborhoods are all in kind of the urban downtown core, which I understand makes sense. But from an equity perspective, that's not where all of the attention necessarily should be. How are we addressing the fact that it looks like the state is making us pay a lot of attention to one area, and that's not necessarily the only area that we should be paying attention to from an equity standpoint?
Eunice can correct me or add on to this, but the rules are all, we have to pay attention to the walkable mixed use areas and to the areas that are historically disadvantaged. And there's not priority given to one over the other. We also have to give priority to frequent transit corridors. So it's not exactly, one isn't better than the other. And the other thing I guess I would say is, Salem's, our zoning that we applied through our Salem, through the comprehensive plan, was much broader than just those 3 areas. And with the goal of really trying to get that mixed use spread out more equally. It's just that the state it's a little bit of an artificial construct. I don't feel like the state rules really add anything, and so we're sort of just doing it to do it, and go ahead, correct me.
No, I agree. I think we knew these rules were coming, right? So when we rezoned all the different areas to mixed use on our transit corridors and different areas across the community, they all reflect similar areas downtown. And it's just that there are some constraints on how you can draw these bubbles and things. And so like we're meeting the rules and also advancing our local priorities, which does include more equitable services.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Frybeck.
So I'm noticing like the transit agency and the district is at the table for a lot of these discussions. I haven't heard of a transportation system plan including things like upgrades to transit service or transit oriented capital projects. Is that something that we're gonna see in this TSP?
The transportation system plan is required by state law to include a transit element. We have one in there today. I will say that historically, we've really leaned on the transit district to speak towards, you know, what their priorities and plans are. We definitely want to support them. I think that with these rules, there is a greater emphasis on what we can do to, you know, enhance transit service, but once again, we don't operate or run it or fund it. And so it's a little bit of an awkward conversation sometimes, especially when we get to the financial constraint part, because that will include, you know, transit operations and development and anyway.
We also though have the benefit of the transit district created their first long-range transit plan a year or two ago. And so we have that to lean on as well. And we coordinate transit all the time. We meet monthly, many meetings. And so I anticipate a lot of close coordination in terms of the infrastructure improvements that we would make that would support.
I would just say the state currently doesn't have authority over the transit district. My guess is that if they did, that they would be requiring them to also do some of this stuff, but because, you know, DLCD at least doesn't have that authority, they can't.
Well, and then, one last question. The next legislative session is a big one for transportation. I've heard talks about increase in STIF funding for transit, more emphasis on bike ped. What kind of impacts could the next legislative session have on the TSP process?
I'd say probably the biggest impact might be on that whole financial constraint discussion, because I know you've heard about the city's general fund problems. Well, the city and the state's, the highway fund is not in a lot better shape at all. And so because of that, you know, when we're talking about financial constraints, we're going to be met with a community desire for all these things and this much money. So if the legislative session results in a transportation package that increases the amount of money available, whether it's targeted to certain modes or not, that will help our conversation, make it a little bit easier. I know that we are tracking those conversations. We do have a staff member who's on one of the work groups, you know, for developing those concepts, but it's sort of beyond my pay grade.
You are a legislative liaison.
Yes, I'm on the legislative liaison, and I'm also on the League of Urban Cities Transportation Policy Advisory Committee, so I'm tracking it.
Other questions? I'll just add one more then. What is the relationship between our interest in reducing vehicle miles traveled and the reduction and the 30% reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions? That's what it's not vehicle miles traveled, it's 30% reduction, it's 30% reduction in. And we have both those metrics floating out there, right?
The way I understand it is that the rule is written to assume that the vehicle, presume, I guess you could say, that a reduction in vehicle miles traveled by 30% will result in a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions of a similar amount. So basically, what we're aiming for is the reduction in vehicle miles traveled. So that's one reason. I mean, part of this is the limitations of, I guess, modeling. But like, for example, if everybody switched to electric vehicles, okay, but we kept driving the same amount, we wouldn't beat the rules. So it's.
That was my question.
Yes, so it's largely a limitation, I guess you could say, of the rules of modeling. I think what I've heard explained is that even if we do have a really, you know, aggressive transition to electric vehicles, it's still gonna take a long time for the fleet to basically turn over. So having an emphasis on reducing vehicle miles traveled is a more immediate benefit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
That's interesting. I would think that the fleet is gonna turn over a lot faster than we're gonna plug all our holes in sidewalk and bike infrastructure. So that's just an interesting approach. So the state's metric is vehicle miles traveled, not actually greenhouse gas.
Yes, as a proxy, and I will say it took a while for that to sort of sink in with me that that's what it was, but I think it's finally sunk in. I don't know, I'm not saying I agree with it or disagree with that, I just, that I can communicate it now.
But it really it puts the onus on the city's infrastructure development to solve the vehicle miles traveled more than individual consumer behavior to switch to a car, switch to an EV car.
I think part of it is because they recognize that local governments really don't have a lot of influence on incentives for people to transition to EV cars or whatever. So they're trying to focus on where the local governments have more tools at their disposal in terms of filling in, active transportation links, pricing. So, the pricing strategies,
And the future scenarios, the state-led assumptions and even whatever preferred will assume changes at the state level and the levers that they have as well. So like fuel mix or what have you.
Thank you. Final questions? Going once? All right, thank you both for your time. We appreciate it. Moving on, subcommittee reports. Subcommittee reports. I will just say, on the Wetlands Committee, I have a draft that will go out to Commissioners Heller and Vera Brendel, so we can start to report down that. And our intention there is to use our limited powers to ask the state what they're doing with their property in the city of Salem. Since they have a fair amount of property, and I think it's just a fair statement that some of it could be improved to meet the standards that we're being held to. So hopefully we can report on that in the next short period of time. Anything else? No, I think our planning administrator is up.
First thing is just a reminder, I think the next scheduled item we have is November 5th. And we're gonna have a presentation on FEMA regulations, collecting, preparing areas, etc. from Robin Dolphy. There's a lot actually going on with FEMA regulations right now, so that's very interesting timing. We had Planner Palooza last week, Commissioner Via Rendell, Commissioner Rhodes came, and Commissioner Freitag, right? Yeah. And it was really fun, so thanks guys for coming. We're have to be on what you were doing, what you could possibly have to do that was better than Planner Palooza, but. But we had a pretty good turnout, a good combination of staff across the city, and then we had folks from Council of Governments, and we didn't have any chariots or DLCD staff this year, although we normally do. Neighborhood folks, some like developers, architects, engineers, planning commissioners, councilors, students, retired planners that had just moved to Oregon and got on our list somehow and just wanted to chat about planning in Texas in the 70s. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, a lot of good stuff. And some people won prizes. Actually, I think Commissioner Rhodes and then I think your partner won a prize too, right? It wasn't a fix. And I think a counselor won a prize too. I don't know. It's all going to elected and appointed officials. But I just pulled the names right out of the thing. So I don't know, anybody, any other thoughts? Anything you want us to do different next year? If so, Eunice is one of the people that plans it, so let her know.
My girlfriend says she really likes games and she was looking forward to playing games, but she wanted more playing games.
Okay.
Planning games.
We're setting.
There was a Salem board game. Yeah, it's like from the 80s or something, it's like to do with like the one-way streets. Some of you have seen that? Yeah. You haven't? Yeah. Yeah.
Next year.
Yeah. And then the only other update I have is about the appeal last night at Council. I'm looking at Commissioner Bach because you made the motion for the condition. So this was the planned unit development at Creekside, and it's it's an 11 lot subdivision, we had a hearing, it was, record was held open, went to deliberations at a different meeting. And then the commission, I think unanimously, I had to check, but that was discussed throughout the hearing, yeah, I think it was. I don't remember, like Counselor Phillips kept saying it was unanimous, but I didn't know if I can check. To add a condition that they build a sidewalk on the north side of Creekside Drive, which the applicant had appealed, and so that appealed to city council last night. And the only testimony besides staff presentation was from the applicant's attorney. They had many reasons not to have that condition, which we refuted in the staff report, and it was unconstitutional, and it was a takings, and kind of very significant threw everything at us. Obviously, it's with our purview to require sidewalk in the street, right? And so we recommended that they uphold your decision. There was a lot of discussion and debate amongst the council, and they ultimately voted to remove the condition. It was not unanimous. The mayor was going, so it was 6-2. So Councilor Phillips and Councilor Barney were like, nope, keep the sidewalk. Planning Commission knows what they're doing. We support the Planning Commission. They looked at this longer than we did, and they really know what they're doing. And we think, yes, build the sidewalk. And the other counselors, yeah, I normally, I would say that, but I think in this case, it's fine. It was kind of like the vibe of the rest of the comments, so. They didn't keep the conditions. Tried, you can go watch it on YouTube if you're interested. If they have any questions about it. They had a lot of questions about, well, why did the Planning Commission, well, why do we ever require sidewalks, right? Connectivity, safety, livability, there's reasons why we require sidewalks. What applies to this situation? Take a break, debate amongst themselves, what their main issues, so. They
Took it
they
seriously.
took it seriously and took some time on it, and ultimately, I'm sorry to tell you, remove that condition, but approved it.
Reasonable people can disagree.
Absolutely true.
I tell that myself every night before I go to bed. I think one of our roles here is to be an advocate for the comprehensive plan. And I think sometimes when the council gets faced with an issue, they don't always bring the perspective of the comprehensive plan to bear on their decision making. Just because, they see this one individual case as opposed to in the larger context of what our overall policy goals are. I think it's helpful from time to time, remind them of that or why we made the decision and that it's consistent with what they've already adopted, which I think is the case in the decision that we made here. That we were really working to implement the council's adopted policy and comprehensive plan related to connectivity. So it's too bad, but.
Yeah, and I think that happens a lot on appeals or just hearings that come before the council. And maybe, I don't know, I'm not a commissioner, maybe you feel the same pressure when there's folks standing in front of you with a very specific request, trying to give them what they need to make their development happen or whatever. And so it's a lot of times staff is like, oh, but wait, remember your plan. Oh, but wait, remember the code. Oh, but wait, remember you told us this was really important to you, and you apply it every day for these permits. And just like when the cases come to you all, you can decide, well, no, we don't want to this time. And that's okay. We did explain that there's criteria to not part of the sidewalk, and here's how it was evaluated as staff, originally recommended not requiring it, but then also what the requirement was and criteria for you applying and that's what they did. So.
In a case like that, is there any way that we could start having a pay in lieu of? Because there are many locations throughout the city that have either little to no sidewalks, and it's detrimental to the livability of those neighborhoods. I mean, if it's required and you're asking to not do it, feels like you should still have to at least offset whatever your rationale behind not putting it in on your development for the site condition or whatever it may be. But there should still be an element of contributing back to the city that you're developing.
Yeah, there's something called a deferral fee, so most of the time, like, think of like a two-lot partition, they're on the street, there's no sidewalks, but the code says you have to build a sidewalk. So you build a sidewalk, and then they say, well, it doesn't go anywhere, and it's not as simple as just building a curb, that kind of thing. And so we'll come up with kind of a proportional share. So we'll say build a sidewalk, but then the code allows them after the decision to come in and say, can I have a deferral? Either put it like on my deed, that when the city's ready to build it, I'm gonna pay my portion, or there's an option to ask for a fee in lieu. So you pay the fee and you don't do it. And then currently the way it works is the fee is held for that thing in the future. There was a proposal by Public Works to change that. It came through Planning Commission. It had some other parts with it related to street trees that, after it came to Planning Commission, legal was like, oh my God, this is wrong. And so we're still working on it, state to council, but in that proposal, the money could be collected on the ward, within the ward for this type of infrastructure. So if you paid it for a water line, then the money could go in just a pot for a water line in that. I don't know if the ward is the right, wards are pretty big, neighborhood boundaries, they're also kind of, but I'm pretty sure the draft says ward. You pay for the sidewalk in that ward because it's also quite a tracking system finance does. They create an account for that sidewalk for that street and maybe keep track of it for 30 years. So that came through Planning Commission liked it. I want to say it was like 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. It just hasn't gone to council yet. And I don't have any idea if council would be supportive of that. We haven't had that conversation with them yet. Staff working on it left the city as well, so that's why it's kind of hanging up.
My recollection, I was on the losing end of this vote, because I did not like it. Is that this commission approved it, and now the language is going directly to the council. So we will not look at it again. It will just go. So, right. So if Creekside were to do a fee in lieu of, that could be used anywhere in the ward now, or at least under our recommendation, using we're not necessarily that as an immediate benefit to that neighborhood.
I will say in this case, the case we're talking about, it's incredibly rare, and I can't actually think of an instance in the 10 years I've been planning administrator that we say don't build the sidewalk. Normally we require it, and then either they build it, most of the time they build it, or they try to defer, do a fee in lieu. Because code allows us to do that. So this is one of the rare instances. If you remember back, the criteria is you can ask for an alternative street standard, similar to like a variance for your street. And so we have developments that ask for that, but it's almost never for sidewalk. It's normally for block length, if their streets would be a little bit longer or a lot longer, and a lot of times residential subdivision due to grade or whatever, we'll say, okay, you can have it longer, but you gotta put it to that stream to get block grade to get that. So we do that a lot. Sometimes it'll be for grade. Sometimes it will be to have a cul-de-sac instead of making the street go through, even though the street conservative, the grade is too steep. So although we have that kind of flexibility through subdivisions and other developments, it's almost never used for a sidewalk. So I would say slightly less than 100% of the time, the condition will say build the sidewalk. This one was just various factors for this one. Having the whatevers that we presented last night is presenting to you all, but so most of the time we're either doing a sidewalk where they're going to be paying or they're going to be deferring it. And you would think, oh, those deferrals, do they ever? Maybe never happen with them, but we recently had a subdivision on maybe last 2 years, Boone. We had 2 subdivisions on Boone Road, and then there was a house in between, no sidewalk. Subdivisions were doing the sidewalks, and there were sidewalks, and it was like, oh, Boone's gonna, but there's this house, and this lady lives here, and she's got these really bushes where the sidewalk would go. And then so we asked Public Works, what's going on with that? And I'm like, oh, let me check. And there's a deferral. She did a partition. There's a deferral from 20 years ago. And this Public Works director can call it up. And we were like, lady, you gotta put the sidewalk down, which the council has to do it. So it went to council. We take it to council. I know this lady doesn't want to build, probably didn't plan for this, but now it's the only link missing in Boone Road. And yeah, they called it up and told her she had to build her sidewalk and she actually negotiated with the developer to build it for her. Save her some money and now the full sidewalk is there. Libby is very happy about it. It's one of her, crowning achievements being a planner. It's really hard to get that sidewalk, so it does happen, before we get the money. But I agree with you, they're not gonna build it. Pony up.
Commissioner Hudson.
Yeah, so I was out and about this past weekend out here. It was on Park Avenue, just north of the state hospital, south of D Street. There's a relatively new housing apartment development. And on Park Avenue, there is it's a multi-use path. And the intent of it is if you're riding your bike along Park Avenue, is you get onto the multi-use path because there's no bike lane or something on the park. So you ride on the multi-use path, and then 1 block later, the path ends, and you have to get back on Park Avenue. And I looked at this, and the development continued further past Park Avenue, but there are homes that were constructed there went right up to the sidewalk. And the path ended because past that point, there was nothing. So, to me, it appeared that some easement or whatever was not dedicated to continue this path further down part to the state hospital or whatever. Because maybe the city wasn't able to require a multi-use path to be constructed or an easement to be required.
There is a path that's planned and required from D Street to Center Street through the middle of the development in lieu of the street, but it's not built yet because the state still owns the vacant property on Center Street. Is that what you mean, northwest? Or north south, sorry?
Yeah, as on Park, there is a multi-use path. Yeah. It's like green by paint or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just kind of ends it makes you turn left. And to me, it doesn't make sense why that was constructed that way. Because it doesn't necessarily.
I will say this,
Our transportation
Yeah.
planner has, perhaps our transportation planner has.
that she remembers it, but I will tell you this. This came to planning commission before all of you as a big comp plan zone change in subdivision, and we wanted to put the streets through, and they didn't want to, and then we were like, put the paths through, and planning commission was really against it, and the applicant was against it, and we fight really hard to get it. So there is a condition, I know, to put one north, south, and we're just waiting for the rest of it, so I can't remember east, west. Because obviously it doesn't mean something like Fox or whatever.
Commissioner Trivia, please.
Pardon my interruption, I have to go pick up my son. May I please be excused?
I think we can probably actually adjourn if no one has any objections. Are we okay? Attorney, all right, we're adjourned.